Have you ever, in perfect silence, heard a whisper of your name? Or caught a flicker of movement in an empty room out of the corner of your eye? That isn't your imagination. It's an echo, the echo of a long-forgotten story, trying to be remembered. Welcome to Echoed Chronicles, the place where we listen to the stories that never truly died. The fluorescent lights of the Blackwood High Library hummed a monotonous, buzzing tune, a sound so constant that it had become the school's unofficial heartbeat. For Liam, it was the sound of impending boredom. He slouched lower in his unforgiving wooden chair, tracing the deep grooves carved into the table by generations of equally uninspired students. Initials and dates, a crude drawing of a skull, the desperate "please send help" etched in shaky lettering. It was a museum of teenage apathy. Across from him, Chloe was the complete opposite. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with an intensity that Liam could never hope to match, especially not for a local history project. A cascade of loose papers, photocopied articles, and books fanned out around her, a fortress of research protecting her from the library's soul-crushing quiet. "I'm telling you, this is it," she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. She slid a grainy, black-and-white photograph across the table. It showed a group of grim-faced men in work clothes standing in front of a half-finished brick building. "This is the construction of the East Wing, 1924. Noah, sitting to Liam's right, leaned over to get a better look, his phone already in hand, though he was trying to be subtle about it. "Any ghosts in the shot? A spooky face in the window." "Not funny, Noah," Chloe said, though a small smile tugged at her lips. "This is serious. This is our project. Forget the founding of the town's first cannery or the history of the old bridge. We're doing the disappearance of Arthur Blackwood." Liam groaned softly. He knew this was coming. For the past week, Chloe had been dropping hints, seeding conversations with trivia about the school's most persistent ghost story. Every school had one. A spectral janitor, a ghostly prom queen, a basketball player who eternally practiced free throws in the dead of night. Blackwood High had Arthur. "Chloe, he didn't disappear," Liam said, picking up the photo. The men looked tired. The sky behind them was a flat, washed-out gray. The guy was a janitor in the 70s. He probably got tired of cleaning up after people like us, packed a bag, and moved to Florida. "That's the official story," Chloe countered, her voice rising in excitement. "But it's full of holes. The police report said he left a full paycheck on his kitchen table. His car was still in the school parking lot. His sister, who lived in the next town over, said he would never have left without saying goodbye. And the last person to see him was another teacher, Mr. Albright, who swore he saw Arthur heading into the East Wing for his final sweep of the night. He never came out." The East Wing. It was the oldest part of the school, a Gothic revival relic attached to the modern, functional main building like a forgotten, decaying limb. It had been sealed off for as long as any of them could remember, condemned due to asbestos, faulty wiring, and a foundation that was slowly surrendering to the earth. The doors were chained and padlocked, the windows boarded from the inside. It was a place of myth, the subject of countless dares and drunken stories. "Okay, I'm in," Noah declared, finally lowering his phone. The screen showed he'd been looking up vintage camera filters. "Think of the content. Students uncover truth behind haunted high school. We could get access, film inside the abandoned wing. This could be huge." Liam looked from Noah's opportunistic gleam to Chloe's academic fervor. He was the tiebreaker, the reluctant anchor in their little group. Sitting beside him, Maya had been quiet through the whole exchange, her pen hovering over a blank notebook. She was the fourth member of their project group, the one who always seemed to sense the precise moment a bad idea was solidifying into a plan. "We're not going to get access to the East Wing," Maya said quietly, her voice a splash of cold, sensible water. "It's condemned for a reason. There's probably black mold and rats the size of cats in there. We can do the project on him, fine, but we do it from here, from the library, with books." "But that's the point," Chloe insisted, gathering her papers into a slightly neater pile. "The The story is in there. The answers are in there. Arthur is in there. She dropped her voice to a dramatic whisper. They say you can still hear him sometimes. His keys, jingling in the empty corridors. Liam had heard the stories. Everyone had. A faint metallic rattling heard late at night from the other side of the wall that separated the new gym from the old, condemned section. Most people wrote it off as the building settling, old pipes groaning in their concrete graves. But for the true believers, it was Arthur Blackwood, still walking his eternal rounds. "Mr. Davison has the keys," Chloe said, looking at each of them in turn. "The head janitor. His office is in the basement. I've heard he's eccentric, but he was here when it happened. He was a junior custodian back in '78. He knew Arthur." A shiver, unwelcome and irritating, traced a path down Liam's spine. He hated when that happened, the involuntary physical reaction to a story he knew was just that. A story. It was the thought of the East Wing, a place so close, a part of their daily lives, yet completely alien. A dead space, sealed and silent, right next to the thrumming, chaotic life of the school. "So, what's the plan?" Liam asked, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. He was already resigning himself to his fate. He knew that look on Chloe's face. He knew the determined set of Noah's jaw. He was going to end up in a dark, dusty hallway sooner or later. "The plan," Chloe said, a triumphant grin spreading across her face, "is we start with the archives. School board meeting minutes from the '70s. Blueprints. Anything that can give us a reason, a real academic reason, to ask Mr. Davison for a little tour." She looked at Maya, softening her expression. "It'll be perfectly safe. Just a preliminary investigation." Maya did not look convinced. She chewed on the end of her pen, her gaze fixed on the locked double doors at the far end of the library. They didn't lead outside. They led to a short, carpeted hallway that terminated at another set of doors, the chained and padlocked entrance to the East Wing. Sometimes, Liam thought he could feel a draft coming from them, a chill that had nothing to do with the library's overzealous air conditioning. The librarian, a woman with hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch the skin of her face, cleared her throat from behind her desk, a sound like a pebble rattling in a tin can. It was a warning. Their hushed but excited conversation was breaking the sacred silence. Chloe gathered her papers, her movements quick and efficient. Noah pocketed his phone. The planning session was over. As they packed their bags, Liam's eyes were drawn back to the photo of the construction crew. The men looked small and insignificant against the looming brick facade of the building they were erecting. There was something in the architecture, even in the grainy photo, that felt wrong. The windows were too tall and narrow, like eye slits. The pitch of the roof was too severe. It didn't look like a place of learning. It looked like a place that held its breath, waiting. The fluorescent lights of the Blackwood High Library hummed a monotonous, buzzing tune, a sound so constant that it had become the school's unofficial heartbeat. For Liam, it was the sound of impending boredom. He slouched lower in his unforgiving wooden chair, tracing the deep grooves carved into the table by generations of equally uninspired students. Initials and dates, a crude drawing of a skull, the desperate "please send help" etched in shaky lettering. It was a museum of teenage apathy. Across from him, Chloe was the complete opposite. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with an intensity that Liam could never hope to match, especially not for a local history project. A cascade of loose papers, photocopied articles, and books fanned out around her, a fortress of research protecting her from the library's soul-crushing quiet. "I'm telling you, this is it," she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. She slid a grainy, black-and-white photograph across the table. It showed a group of grim-faced men in work clothes standing in front of a half-finished brick building. "This is the construction of the East Wing. 1924. Noah, sitting to Liam's right, leaned over to get a better look, his phone already in hand, though he was trying to be subtle about it. "Any ghosts in the shot? A spooky face in the window." "Not funny, Noah," Chloe said, though a small smile tugged at her lips. "This is serious. This is our project. Forget the founding of the town's first cannery or the history of the old bridge. We're doing the disappearance of Arthur Blackwood. Liam groaned softly. He knew this was coming. For the past week, Chloe had been dropping hints, seeding conversations with trivia about the school's most persistent ghost story. Every school had one. A spectral janitor, a ghostly prom queen, a basketball player who eternally practiced free throws in the dead of night. Blackwood High had Arthur. Chloe, he didn't disappear, Liam said, picking up the photo. The men looked tired. The sky behind them was a flat, washed-out gray. The guy was a janitor in the 70s. He probably got tired of cleaning up after people like us, packed a bag, and moved to Florida. That's the official story, Chloe countered, her voice rising in excitement. But it's full of holes. The police report said he left a full paycheck on his kitchen table. His car was still in the school parking lot. His sister, who lived in the next town over, said he would never have left without saying goodbye. And the last person to see him was another teacher, Mr. Albright, who swore he saw Arthur heading into the East Wing for his final sweep of the night. He never came out. The East Wing. It was the oldest part of the school, a Gothic revival relic attached to the modern, functional main building like a forgotten, decaying limb. It had been sealed off for as long as any of them could remember, condemned due to asbestos, faulty wiring, and a foundation that was slowly surrendering to the earth. The doors were chained and padlocked, the windows boarded from the inside. It was a place of myth, the subject of countless dares and drunken stories. "Okay, I'm in," Noah declared, finally lowering his phone. The screen showed he'd been looking up vintage camera filters. Think of the content. Students uncover truth behind haunted high school. We could get access, film inside the abandoned wing. This could be huge. Liam looked from Noah's opportunistic gleam to Chloe's academic fervor. He was the tiebreaker, the reluctant anchor in their little group. Sitting beside him, Maya had been quiet through the whole exchange, her pen hovering over a blank notebook. She was the fourth member of their project group, the one who always seemed to sense the precise moment a bad idea was solidifying into a plan. "We're not going to get access to the East Wing," Maya said quietly, her voice a splash of cold, sensible water. "It's condemned for a reason. There's probably black mold and rats the size of cats in there. We can do the project on him, fine, but we do it from here, from the library, with books." "But that's the point," Chloe insisted, gathering her papers into a slightly neater pile. "The story is in there. The answers are in there. Arthur is in there." She dropped her voice to a dramatic whisper. "They say you can still hear him sometimes. His keys, jingling in the empty corridors." Liam had heard the stories. Everyone had. A faint metallic rattling heard late at night from the other side of the wall that separated the new gym from the old, condemned section. Most people wrote it off as the building settling, old pipes groaning in their concrete graves. But for the true believers, it was Arthur Blackwood, still walking his eternal rounds. "Mr. Davison has the keys," Chloe said, looking at each of them in turn. "The head janitor. His office is in the basement. I've heard he's eccentric, but he was here when it happened. He was a junior custodian back in '78. He knew Arthur." A shiver, unwelcome and irritating, traced a path down Liam's spine. He hated when that happened, the involuntary physical reaction to a story he knew was just that. A story. It was the thought of the East Wing, a place so close, a part of their daily lives, yet completely alien. A dead space, sealed and silent, right next to the thrumming, chaotic life of the school. "So, what's the plan?" Liam asked, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. He was already resigning himself to his fate. He knew that look on Chloe's face. He knew the determined set of Noah's jaw. He was going to end up in a dark, dusty hallway sooner or later. "The plan," Chloe said, a triumphant grin spreading across her face, "is we start with the archives. School board meeting minutes from the '70s. Blueprints. Anything that can give us a reason, a real academic reason, to ask Mr. Davison for a little tour." She looked at Maya, softening her expression. "It'll be perfectly safe. Just a preliminary investigation." Maya did not look convinced. She chewed on the end of her pen, her gaze fixed on the locked double doors at the far end of the library. They didn't lead outside. They led to a short, carpeted hallway that terminated at another set of doors, the chained and padlocked entrance to the east wing. Sometimes, Liam thought he could feel a draft coming from them, a chill that had nothing to do with the library's overzealous air conditioning. The librarian, a woman with hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch the skin of her face, cleared her throat from behind her desk, a sound like a pebble rattling in a tin can. It was a warning. Their hushed but excited conversation was breaking the sacred silence. Chloe gathered her papers, her movements quick and efficient. Noah pocketed his phone. The planning session was over. As they packed their bags, Liam's eyes were drawn back to the photo of the construction crew. The men looked small and insignificant against the looming brick facade of the building they were erecting. There was something in the architecture, even in the grainy photo, that felt wrong. The windows were too tall and narrow, like eye slits. The pitch of the roof was too severe. It didn't look like a place of learning. It looked like a place that held its breath, waiting. As they walked out of the library and into the bustling, noisy main corridor, the sudden burst of life was jarring. Students laughed, lockers slammed, the PA system crackled with an announcement. The normal sounds of a normal high school. But Liam couldn't shake the image of the old photograph. He glanced down the long, modern hallway toward the new gym. The wall on the left was painted with a massive, snarling timberwolf, the school mascot. But behind that mural, behind the drywall and the insulation and the fresh paint, lay the east wing, silent, waiting, and, if Chloe was to be believed, not entirely empty. The school's basement was a different world. The cheerful, chaotic energy of the main floors evaporated the moment they passed through the heavy fire door at the bottom of the C stairwell. The air grew instantly colder, carrying the damp, earthy smell of old concrete and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness like decaying paper. A single line of fluorescent fixtures, caged in wire mesh, cast a sickly yellow-green light down a long, featureless corridor. "Archives are this way," Chloe said, her voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. She led them with an unearned confidence, her footsteps sure and steady on the grimy linoleum. The archive room was less a room and more a forgotten closet at the end of the hall. It didn't even have a proper handle, just a small, recessed brass ring. Chloe had to use both hands to pull the heavy door open, revealing a cramped space choked with gray metal shelves. Cardboard boxes, some stained with watermarks and threatening to collapse under their own weight, were stacked from floor to ceiling. The air inside was thick with the dust of decades, a fine powder that danced in the light from the corridor and tickled the back of Liam's throat. "Home sweet home," Noah muttered, pulling the collar of his shirt up over his nose. "Smells like my grandpa's attic died in here." "All right, let's be smart about this," Chloe said, ignoring him. She was already scanning the faded, handwritten labels on the boxes. "We need anything from the mid to late 70s. Board minutes, maintenance logs, budget proposals. Maya, you take that shelf. Noah, you start on that stack by the door. Liam, see what's in the back corner." Liam navigated the narrow aisle between shelves, the rough texture of cardboard scraping against his jacket. The back corner was the darkest and dustiest. He found a stack of yearbooks and pulled one from the middle. Blackwood High, class of 1978. He blew a cloud of dust off the cover and opened it. "Mr. Davison?" Chloe called out, her voice a little too high. "We're students. We have a question about our history project." There was a sound of movement from within, the scrape of a chair, a low grumble. The door opened a few inches. A man's face appeared in the gap. He was older than his yearbook photo suggested, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his hair completely white but still thick. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, were sharp and suspicious. They scanned the four of them, one by one, lingering on the blueprint in Chloe's hand. "History project?" he said, his voice a low rasp, like sandpaper on wood. "What's a janitor know about history?" He made no move to open the door further. "It's about the school's architecture," Chloe said quickly, trying to sound as academic as possible. "We were in the archives, and we found the original blueprints for the East Wing." She took a half-step forward, trying to appear non-threatening. "We noticed something unusual. We were hoping you could clarify it for us." Davison's eyes narrowed. He looked past them, down the long, empty corridor, as if checking to see if they were alone. After a long, tense pause, he sighed and opened the door wider. "Get in. Don't want the heat from the boilers escaping." His office was small and cramped but surprisingly clean. The air smelled of industrial cleaner, strong coffee, and old wool. A metal desk was pushed against the far wall, covered in neat stacks of paperwork, a heavy-duty stapler, and a mug with a faded picture of a fisherman on it. An old calendar from a decade ago hung crookedly on the wall, showing a picture of a snow-covered mountain. On a small shelf, a tiny, flickering black and white television played a silent soap opera. He gestured to the floor. "No chairs. You can stand." He retreated behind his desk, the springs of his own chair groaning in protest as he sat. He watched them, his hands steepled on the desk, his expression unreadable. Chloe, undeterred, knelt and unrolled the blueprint on the floor, weighting the corners with a stray wrench and a heavy roll of duct tape from a nearby shelf. "Here, sir," she said, pointing. "This is the basement level of the East Wing. We've identified the boiler room, the old storage areas, but this room here," she traced the outline of the blank rectangle. "It's sealed. No doors, no windows. It's not on any of the later revisions we found. It's just a void. Do you know what it was for?" Davison leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and stared down at the blueprint. The silence in the small office stretched on, thick and heavy. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic drip from the hallway and the silent, melodramatic gestures of the actors on the tiny television. He stared at the spot Chloe had indicated for a full minute. His face seemed to pale, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "Where did you say you found this?" he asked, his voice low and tight. He didn't look up from the drawing. "In the archives, in a tube labeled miscellaneous, structural," Maya offered quietly. He finally lifted his gaze from the blueprint, and the suspicion in his eyes had been replaced by something else. A deep, profound weariness, mixed with a flicker of what looked like fear. "Some things are better left in their tubes," he said softly. He looked at each of them again, his gaze lingering on their young, eager faces. "This isn't history. This is picking at a scab. That wing is closed for a reason. More than one." "We know about Arthur Blackwood," Noah blurted out. Davison's head snapped toward him, his eyes suddenly hard as ice. "You don't know anything," he snarled, the sudden venom in his voice making all four of them take an involuntary step back. "You read a ghost story in the school paper and you think you know. You have no idea." He stood up, his presence suddenly filling the small room. "Arthur was a good man, quiet man. He deserves to be left in peace." "But he wasn't," Chloe insisted, her voice shaking slightly but still firm. "He disappeared, right here, in that wing. Maybe that room has something to do with it. We just want to know the truth." Davison looked from Chloe's determined face back down to the impossible room on the blueprint. He ran a hand over his face, the rasp of his stubble loud in the silence. He looked old suddenly, defeated. "The truth," he muttered, more to himself than to them. "The truth won't fit on your project board." He was quiet for another long moment, lost in a memory they couldn't access. Finally, he looked at them, his expression grim. "Get out. Go to class. Forget you ever saw this." They stood frozen, unsure of what to do. He wasn't yelling anymore. He just sounded tired. "But," Chloe started. "I said get out," he repeated, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. "I need to think." They retreated from the janitor's office, the heavy door clicking shut behind them with a note of finality. The four of them stood in the yellow-lit corridor, the distant dripping of the pipe suddenly sounding like a ticking clock. The encounter had left them shaken. Mr. Davison's fear had been more potent and convincing than any ghost story. It was real. It was visceral. "Well, that was a bust," Noah said, breaking the silence. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous energy thrumming through him. "I thought he was going to throw that wrench at us." "No, it wasn't a bust," Chloe said, her voice low and intense. She was staring at the closed door of the office. "Don't you see? He knows. He knows what that room is." He was terrified. "That's not a denial. That's a confirmation." "Confirmation of what?" Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. "That we should leave this alone? Because that's what I got from that conversation." "He knew Arthur," Liam added, thinking of the janitor's sudden anger. "This isn't just a story for him. It's personal." He looked down the long, empty basement hallway. The very air seemed to press in on them. "I think Maya's right. Maybe we should just write the report on what we found. The blueprint, the newspaper article. That's enough for a project." Chloe turned to him, her eyes blazing with a frustrated fire. "Enough? Liam, we are standing on the edge of the answer. That man holds the key, literally, to a place that has been sealed for 40 years. A man disappeared in there. We found a secret room on the original plans. We are not stopping now." She started walking back toward the stairs, her steps determined. "We just need a new plan." The new plan came to them, as most bad ideas did, over lukewarm pizza in Noah's garage later that night. The space was filled with his filmmaking equipment, tripods, light stands, and a dusty green screen propped against one wall. The blueprint was spread out on a workbench, held down by a C-clamp and a can of WD-40. "He's not going to give us the keys," Noah said, gesturing with a slice of pepperoni. "Not willingly. The guy looks like he guards that wing like a dragon guards its gold." "So we don't ask," Chloe said simply. Liam and Maya both looked at her. "What are you suggesting?" Liam asked, though he already had a sinking feeling he knew the answer. "Mr. Davison's key ring," Chloe said, tapping a section of the blueprint. "He has to have a master key for the East Wing entrance. I saw it when he was standing up. There's a huge loop of keys hanging from his belt. Brass ones, silver ones, all different shapes. He's an old-school janitor. He doesn't use key cards." "You want to steal his keys?" Maya asked, her voice incredulous. "Chloe, that's insane. And illegal." "Borrow," Chloe corrected. "We borrow them. For an hour. We go in, we document the room in the basement, and we bring them right back. He'll never even know they were gone." She leaned forward, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "His shift ends at 11. He always stops at the vending machine in the teacher's lounge for a soda before he clocks out. I've seen him. The lounge is always empty at that time of night. He leaves his cleaning cart right outside the door." "This is a terrible, terrible idea," Liam said, shaking his head. "It's the only idea," Noah countered, a familiar glint in his eye. "Think of the footage. No access location. Real paranormal investigation. We'll need night vision cameras. I can get a couple." "I'm not a criminal," Maya stated flatly, crossing her arms. "I'm not stealing keys from a sad old man." "You won't have to," Chloe said, her plan already fully formed. "I'll do it. I'll lift the keys. Liam, you'll be my lookout. Maya and Noah, you'll be our alibi. You guys can be in the gym, practicing basketball. If anyone asks where we are, you just say we went to the bathroom or to get water. We meet back at the East Wing doors in the main hall at 11:15. Liam stared at her. The whole thing sounded like a plot from a bad movie. It was reckless, stupid, and bound to fail. But he also looked at the blueprint at the blank, doorless room. He remembered the look on Mr. Davison's face, a fear so profound it seemed to have been etched there for decades. Curiosity was a powerful, insidious thing. It was a hook, and it had sunk deep. "What if we get caught?" he asked, the question a final, flimsy shield against his own reluctant agreement. "We won't," Chloe said with a confidence he didn't feel. "It'll be fast. In and out. We stick to the plan, we stay quiet, and we finally find out what's behind that wall." The rest of the evening was a blur of nervous energy and logistical planning. Noah eagerly began charging batteries and packing camera bags. Chloe went over the layout of the teacher's lounge and Davison's nightly routine like a general planning a military campaign. Maya sat silently, a disapproving but ultimately captive audience. Liam felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach, but he didn't protest further. He was in. They were all in. Later that night, long after he'd gone home, Liam lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the janitor's weary, frightened eyes. He kept picturing the cold, silent basement and the blueprint with its impossible secret room. He thought about Arthur Blackwood, the man with the sad eyes in the yearbook, who had walked into that wing one night and simply ceased to be. The story had felt distant before, a piece of school folklore. But now it felt real, felt close. It felt like a door had been opened, and soon they were all going to step through it. And he had a terrible, chilling feeling that whatever was on the other side had been waiting for them. The school felt different at night. The familiar hallways, usually teeming with the vibrant chaos of hundreds of students, were now cavernous and silent. The only sounds were the hum of the emergency lights and the squeak of their own sneakers on the polished floors. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet. He and Chloe moved through the shadows, sticking close to the walls, the thrill of their mission warring with a primal fear of getting caught. They reached the corner that led to the teacher's lounge. Peeking around the edge, Liam could see Mr. Davison's gray utility cart parked just outside the frosted glass door, exactly as Chloe had predicted. It was laden with cleaning supplies, a mop bucket, and a half-empty box of industrial-strength trash bags. "He's in there," Chloe whispered, her breath fogging slightly in the cool air. "Okay, look out." She didn't wait for a reply. She darted forward, her movements surprisingly fluid and silent. Liam stayed at the corner, his back pressed against the cold cinder-block wall, his eyes scanning the long, empty corridor in both directions. Every distant creak of the old building sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He could hear the faint, rhythmic clunk and whir of the vending machine inside the lounge as Davison made his selection. Chloe reached the cart. She crouched down, making herself small, her eyes fixed on the silhouette of the janitor visible through the frosted glass. He was facing away from the door, toward the machine. Liam saw her hand snake out, quick and precise, toward the man's jacket, which was draped over the cart's handle. The key ring was there, a heavy, metallic cluster hanging from a carabiner clipped to a belt loop. Liam held his breath. Her fingers closed around the keys. For a terrifying second, they jingled, a faint, metallic whisper that sounded as loud as a fire alarm in the silence. Liam's blood ran cold. Inside the lounge, the janitor's silhouette paused. He seemed to cock his head, as if listening. Liam was sure they were caught. He braced himself for the door to fly open, for the shouting to begin. But after a moment, the janitor simply bent down to retrieve his soda from the machine's slot. Chloe didn't hesitate. She unclipped the carabiner with a barely audible click and pulled the keys free. She was on her feet and moving back toward Liam before the janitor had even straightened up. She practically flew into him at the corner, pressing the heavy, cold mass of keys into his hand. "Go," she hissed. "Meet at the doors." She veered off in the direction of the gym, leaving Liam alone in the hallway with the stolen keys. They felt unnaturally heavy in his palm, a tangible weight of their transgression. He shoved them into his pocket and forced himself to walk, not run, toward the rendezvous point. The keys knocked against his leg with every step, a constant, guilty reminder of what they were doing. He found Noah and Maya waiting by the double doors to the east wing. The doors were secured by a thick, rusty chain looped through their handles and fastened with an enormous, ancient-looking padlock. Noah had his camera out, a professional-looking rig with a small light mounted on top, though it was currently switched off. Maya was pacing back and forth, her arms wrapped around herself. "Did you get them?" Noah asked, his voice an excited whisper. Liam pulled the key ring from his pocket. The sheer number of keys was staggering. There must have been 50 of them, all shapes and sizes. Brass, steel, some so old and worn they were smooth as river stones. "Which one is it?" Maya asked, her eyes wide as she looked at the daunting collection. Chloe arrived then, slightly out of breath but with a triumphant look on her face. "It'll be one of the big brass ones," she said, taking the ring from Liam. "Old lock, old key." She began sorting through them, the metallic clinking echoing in the hall. She selected a long, ornate-looking brass key and inserted it into the padlock. It didn't fit. She tried another, and another. Each failed attempt ratcheted up the tension. With every passing second, the risk of being discovered grew. "Hurry up," Noah urged, aiming his camera at the lock as if to intimidate it. "I'm trying," Chloe snapped, her fingers fumbling. "These are all ancient." Finally, on the fifth try, a key slid smoothly into the lock. Chloe turned it. There was a loud, grating click that seemed to echo through the entire school. She pulled the padlock free. The chain fell away from the door handles with a heavy clatter. They were in. Liam reached out and pulled on one of the heavy wooden doors. It resisted for a moment, then opened with a deep, groaning sound, like a sigh held for decades. The air that rolled out of the east wing was thick and cold and smelled of dust, decay, and something else, something faintly sweet and unpleasant, like dried flowers and old meat. It was a dead, stagnant air, completely different from the circulated atmosphere of the main school. Noah switched on his camera light, and the beam cut a sharp, white path into the darkness. It revealed a grand, high-ceilinged entrance hall. A thick blanket of dust covered everything. The marble-tiled floor, a large, shrouded shape that might have been a reception desk, the peeling paint on the walls. Cobwebs, thick as cotton candy, hung from a chandelier that looked like a skeletal metal spider. "Whoa!" Noah breathed, panning his camera slowly across the scene. "This is incredible." Liam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was like stepping into a photograph, a place removed from time. The silence in here was different, too. It was deeper, more absolute. He could feel the weight of it pressing on his ears. Chloe was already moving forward, her phone's flashlight beam dancing ahead of her. The basement stairs should be this way, past the old offices. They followed her, their footsteps unnaturally loud on the dusty floor. They passed darkened classrooms, the glass in their doors so grimy they were nearly opaque. Inside one, Liam could just make out the shadowy shapes of old-fashioned desks, still arranged in neat rows, waiting for students who would never arrive. The door to the basement was at the end of a short hallway, under a faded, hand-painted sign that read "Custodial." It was a simple, solid wood door with a plain iron handle. Chloe tried it. Locked. She sorted through the keys again, her hands moving more surely this time. She found a smaller, simpler steel key that fit the lock. She turned it, and with another click, the way was open. The darkness beyond the door was total, a solid blackness that seemed to absorb the light from their phones. A set of steep, narrow concrete steps led down into the abyss. The air that wafted up was even colder and damper than the hall had been. "Ready for this?" Noah asked, his voice lacking some of its earlier bravado. He pointed his camera down the stairs, its powerful light doing little to pierce the oppressive gloom. Liam looked at Maya. Her face was pale in the reflected glow of the flashlights. She was terrified, but she was still here. He felt a strange kinship with her in that moment. They were the anchors, the ones who felt the true weight of their foolishness. Chloe didn't answer Noah. She just took a breath and started down the steps, one hand trailing along the damp, crumbling wall. One by one, they followed her down, leaving the relative safety of the ground floor behind and descending into the heart of the school's forgotten history. The door swung shut behind them, plunging them into near-total darkness, save for their small, desperate beams of light. The basement of the east wing was a labyrinth of shadows. Their flashlight beams sliced through the thick, inky blackness, revealing glimpses of a world that had been left to rot. Concrete walls wept with moisture, creating dark, slick patches that glistened in the light. The floor was uneven and littered with debris, rotted wooden pallets, rusted metal drums, and mounds of what looked like decaying burlap sacks. The air was heavy and cold, a palpable presence that filled Liam's lungs and made his teeth ache. "Stay close," Chloe's voice echoed from a few feet ahead. She was holding the blueprint, trying to orient them in the disorienting darkness. "The blueprint says the main corridor should run straight ahead. The sealed room is in the northwest corner." Noah swept his camera light across the ceiling, which was a tangled mess of thick pipes and electrical conduits, all furry with decades of dust. "This place is a safety hazard's nightmare," he murmured, though his camera was recording it all with an avid, unblinking eye. "The footage is going to be insane." They moved deeper into the basement, a tight, nervous huddle. Their footsteps crunched on unseen grit, and the sound seemed to be swallowed by the immense, oppressive silence. This wasn't the functional, well-lit basement under the main school. This place felt primal, subterranean, felt like a tomb. Liam kept his light trained on the floor in front of him, wary of tripping over some unseen obstacle. He noticed strange, dark stains on the concrete, some of them fanning out from the base of the walls like dark water. He tried to tell himself it was just moisture, oil, or rust, but a more sinister thought kept worming its way into his mind. "Wait," Maya said, her voice tight. She had stopped, her flashlight beam fixed on a section of the wall to their left. "What is that?" They all stopped and turned their lights to where she was pointing. Scratched into the grimy concrete were words. They weren't neat or deliberate like the graffiti in the library. These were ragged, desperate, gouged into the stone with what must have been a sharp rock or a piece of metal. There were dozens of them, overlapping, a chaotic jumble of frantic messages. Liam stepped closer to read them. "Can't get out. He sees me. It's in the walls. Don't listen. So hungry." And over again, scratched with a terrible, frantic energy. "Not alone." A cold dread, sharp and piercing, went through Liam. This wasn't a prank. This was a testament of pure terror. Who had written this? And when? Maybe some homeless person got in here once, Noah suggested, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. He was filming the words, but he kept glancing nervously down the dark corridor. "No one's been in here for 40 years, Chloe said softly, her bravado finally cracking. She stared at the wall, her face a mask of horrified fascination. These could be old. Liam touched one of the grooves. The concrete was cold and hard. It would have taken time and effort to carve these messages. He imagined someone trapped here in the dark, scratching out their final, terrified thoughts onto the unfeeling stone. He thought of Arthur Blackwood. He pulled his hand back as if the wall had burned him. "We need to find that room and get out of here," he said, his voice low and urgent. They pushed on, the discovery of the scratched messages casting a dark pall over their expedition. The playful thrill of breaking the rules was gone, replaced by a genuine, creeping fear. Every shadow seemed to move. Every drip of water sounded like a footstep. They found the corner of the basement that corresponded to the blueprint. But there was no sign of a sealed room. There was just a flat, unbroken expanse of grimy concrete wall. It looked exactly like every other wall in the basement. "This is it?" Chloe insisted, stabbing her finger at the blueprint, then gesturing at the wall with her light. "It has to be here, the northwest corner. This is the spot." "There's nothing here, Chloe," Noah said, panning his camera across the blank wall. "It's just a wall. Maybe the blueprint was wrong. Maybe it was a proposed room that they never built." "No," she said, her frustration mounting. "It was there. I felt it. Davison's reaction, the stories. It's here." She ran her hands over the cold, damp concrete, pushing and knocking, listening for a hollow sound. There was nothing but the solid, dull thud of thick stone. Liam and Maya started examining the wall as well, their flashlight beams crawling over every inch of its surface, searching for a seam, a crack, an outline. Anything that would suggest a hidden doorway or a false wall. Liam was running his light along the junction where the wall met the floor when he saw it. A subtle difference in the texture of the concrete. A faint, almost invisible line. It wasn't a perfect rectangle, more of a rough, uneven shape, about the size of a low doorway, but it was there, and it looked as though it had been plastered over, the texture of the patch slightly smoother and a shade lighter than the surrounding wall. "Here," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Look." They all crouched down, focusing their beams on the spot. He was right. It was a patch. A very old, very crude patch, but undeniable. Someone had sealed an opening here. "It's been bricked up," Maya breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "From the outside." Chloe knelt and pressed her ear against the patched section, her eyes closing in concentration. "Everybody be quiet," she commanded. The silence that followed was absolute. Liam held his breath, straining his ears, listening to the frantic pounding of his own blood. For a few seconds there was nothing, and then he heard it. It was faint, so faint he wasn't sure at first if he was imagining it. A sound from the other side of the wall, a soft, rhythmic scratching. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It sounded like a fingernail being dragged slowly across stone. It was a patient, persistent sound, an occupied sound. Chloe's eyes flew open, wide with terror. She scrambled backward so quickly she nearly fell, her face ashen in the glare of the flashlights. She didn't need to say a word. They had all heard it. Noah, who had been filming the wall, slowly lowered his camera, his mouth slightly agape. Maya let out a small, muffled sob, pressing her hand to her mouth. The scratching stopped. The silence that rushed back in was somehow worse. It was a heavy, listening silence. It felt like whatever was in that room, on the other side of that thin layer of plaster and brick, knew they were there. And it was waiting. Panic, cold and absolute, seized them. The sound from behind the wall had shattered the last vestiges of their adventurous spirit, replacing it with a primal, desperate need to flee. "We have to go," Maya whispered, her voice trembling so badly the words were barely coherent. "Now." Chloe was already on her feet, scrambling back the way they had come, her flashlight beam a frantic, bouncing star in the darkness. She didn't need any convincing. The blueprint was forgotten on the grimy floor. Noah fumbled with his camera, nearly dropping it before clutching it to his chest like a shield. Liam grabbed Maya's arm, pulling her along as they turned and ran. Their clumsy, terrified flight was a cacophony of panicked breathing and stumbling footsteps. The oppressive silence of the basement was broken by their noise, and it felt like a sacrilege. They were announcing their retreat to the thing in the wall, to the listening darkness. Liam's mind reeled. The scratching. It hadn't been a rat or the building settling. It was deliberate, rhythmic. He couldn't shake the image of a single, long fingernail, dragging itself across the inner surface of the sealed room, over and over, for years. They burst out of the basement corridor and clattered up the concrete stairs, their bodies screaming with adrenaline. The simple wooden door at the top seemed like the gate to salvation. Chloe threw it open, and they spilled out into the dusty entrance hall of the east wing, gasping for air. The relative openness of the hall, after the claustrophobic confines of the basement, did little to soothe their frayed nerves. The silence here was just as deep, the shadows just as long. "The keys," Liam panted, his lungs burning. "We have to lock the basement." Chloe, her hands shaking, fumbled with the massive ring. She found the steel key and, with some difficulty, managed to lock the basement door. The solid click of the bolt sliding into place was a small, temporary comfort. They didn't linger. They hurried through the main hall, their flashlights cutting erratic paths through the gloom. The shrouded furniture and hanging cobwebs now seemed less like historical artifacts and more like monstrous shapes waiting to spring to life. Every flicker of shadow was a potential threat. Liam kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see a figure emerge from the basement door and follow them. They reached the main entrance doors, the ones leading back to the familiar, modern part of the school. Liam wrestled with the heavy chain, his fingers clumsy and numb. He looped it through the handles and snapped the old brass padlock shut. Another click, another barrier between them and the horrors they had uncovered. They didn't stop running until they were halfway down the main corridor of the school, back in the brightly lit, humming world of the 21st century. They collapsed against a bank of lockers, chests heaving, sweat beading on their foreheads. The normal sounds of the school, the buzz of the lights, the distant hum of a floor polisher, were the most beautiful things Liam had ever heard. What was that? Noah finally managed to say, his face pale. He clutched his camera, the lens cap still off. Did you get it? The sound. I don't know, he stammered. I think so. The microphone is sensitive. Who cares about the camera? Maya cried, her voice rising with hysteria. There was something in there. It was alive. We have to put the keys back, Liam said, his mind racing. He was the only one thinking with any semblance of clarity. Davison, if he finds them gone, he'll know. He'll know we went in there. The thought of facing the old janitor now was almost as terrifying as the scratching from the wall. His warning, his fear, it all made a terrible, perfect sense. He hadn't been trying to hide a school secret. He had been trying to protect them. Chloe, still pale and shaky, nodded. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to regain her composure. You're right. We have to put them back. He's probably still on his rounds on the second floor. The group split up again, but this time the dynamic was entirely different. The excitement was gone, replaced by a shared, sickening dread. Noah and Maya retreated to the gym, not as an alibi, but as a refuge. Liam and Chloe, the original culprits of the key theft, were tasked with returning them. They moved through the school again, but their stealth was now born of fear, not of mischief. They found Mr. Davison's cart parked at the far end of the second-floor hallway, outside the science labs. They could hear the rhythmic squeak of his mop against the floor inside one of the classrooms. The return was even more nerve-wracking than the theft. Chloe crouched by the cart, her body tense, while Liam kept watch. He could see Davison's shadow moving back and forth through the narrow window of the classroom door. He was slow, methodical, completely unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded in the building's heart. Chloe clipped the heavy key ring back onto the jacket. This time, the jingle of the keys sounded like a death knell. Liam's entire body tensed, but Davison's methodical squeaking didn't falter. He hadn't heard. They fled, not stopping until they were safely outside the school, standing in the cool night air of the parking lot. The ordeal was over. They were safe, but Liam knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it wasn't over. They hadn't just visited a haunted place. They had disturbed it. They had listened at its door, and it had made its presence known. As they stood there in silence, catching their breath under the orange glow of the parking lot lights, Liam's gaze was drawn back to the school. The new, modern building looked innocuous enough, but rising behind it, a dark, jagged silhouette against the starry sky, was the East Wing. It was a place of secrets and sorrow, a place that held a man's disappearance and a living, breathing horror trapped in its foundation. They had gone looking for a ghost story, something to scare them, something to make their history project more interesting. What they found was so much worse. It wasn't a ghost. A ghost was a memory, an echo of something that was gone. The scratching sound had not been an echo. It was the sound of something that was still there, still waiting, and now it knew they had been listening. Sleep offered no escape. Liam's dreams were a chaotic replay of the night's events, distorted and amplified by his subconscious. He was back in the basement, the air thick and cold, the only light a narrow, flickering beam from his phone. He saw the frantic, desperate words scratched into the wall, but in his dream, they were fresh, the dust from the gouged concrete still falling to the floor. The scratching sound from behind the wall was louder, more insistent, a frantic, rhythmic clawing that vibrated through the soles of his shoes. He would wake up with a gasp, his heart pounding in the quiet of his bedroom, the phantom sound still echoing in his ears. School the next day was a surreal experience. The bustling hallways, the ringing bells, the drone of his teachers' voices. It all felt like a thin veneer of normalcy stretched taut over a terrible secret. He saw Chloe, Noah, and Maya between classes. They didn't speak of what happened. They didn't need to. The shared trauma was a palpable thing between them, a dark cloud that followed them through the crowded halls. They exchanged hollow-eyed glances, their faces pale and drawn. The easy camaraderie they'd had was gone, replaced by a nervous, watchful silence. Noah had checked his camera. The footage was terrifyingly clear. The dark, weeping walls, the frantic messages, the slow pan across the blank, patched-up section of the wall. And the audio. The audio was the worst part. He had isolated it, amplified it. There, beneath their own panicked breathing, was the sound. Faint, dry, rhythmic scraping. It was undeniable. He played it for them once, huddled together in a corner of the noisy cafeteria. Hearing it again in the bright light of day, surrounded by hundreds of oblivious students, was somehow more chilling. It was proof. Their horror was real. Chloe seemed to be taking it the hardest. The mastermind of their expedition, the one who had pushed them forward with such confident zeal, was now a bundle of raw nerves. She jumped at the sound of a slamming locker. She stared intently at the walls, as if she expected them to crumble and reveal the darkness within. During history class, Liam watched her surreptitiously. She wasn't taking notes. She was drawing over and over again the shape of the sealed room from the blueprint. A blank, doorless rectangle. Prison. By the end of the day, a new, unspoken agreement had formed between the four of them. They would never speak of it again. They would do their project on the town's first cannery, as Liam had originally suggested. It was boring, safe, and blessedly free of scratching sounds and sealed rooms. They would delete the footage, burn the blueprint, and try to forget. But the East Wing wasn't willing to be forgotten. It started subtly. Liam was walking to his locker after last period, the hallway already starting to empty out. As he passed the wall that separated the new gym from the old wing, the one with the snarling Timberwolf mural, he felt it. A sudden, intense drop in temperature. It was a pocket of cold so sharp and unnatural it felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer. It lasted for only a second, but it made the hairs on his arms stand up. He paused, looking at the painted wall, at the wolf's angry, unblinking eye. He could almost feel a pressure from the other side, a sense of immense, ancient patience. He shook his head, telling himself it was just a draft, his mind playing tricks on him. But later that night, as he was trying to do his calculus homework, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Maya. "Can you hear that?" Liam frowned. "Hear what?" His phone buzzed again almost immediately. Asterisk keys. "I'm in the library late, finishing that English paper. I keep hearing keys jingling." Asterisk. Liam's blood went cold. The library. The doors at the far end of the library led directly to the chained entrance of the East Wing. He typed back, his fingers trembling slightly. "It's probably just the night janitor." "The night janitor is on the other side of the school," Maya replied. Asterisk. "I just saw him. This is coming from the East Wing doors. It's faint, but it's there." Asterisk. Liam sat frozen in his chair, the calculus problems forgotten. He strained his ears, listening to the silence of his own house. Of course, he couldn't hear anything from miles away, but in his mind's ear he could. A faint, metallic jingle. The sound of Arthur Blackwood's eternal rounds. Or maybe, he thought with a fresh wave of dread, the sound was an invitation. The sound of a lock waiting for a key. The next day, the phenomena grew bolder. Noah was in the darkroom, developing photos for his art class, when the room was plunged into total darkness. The safe light, the enlarger, everything just died. He fumbled his way out into the hallway to find that the power was on everywhere else. When he went back inside to check the breaker, the lights flickered back on by themselves. On the blank wall of the darkroom, written in what looked like developer fluid, was a single spidery word. Listen. The fluid was still wet, but the room had been empty and locked from the inside. Chloe experienced it in the girls' locker room. She was alone, changing after soccer practice, when she heard a voice whisper her name. It was a dry, sibilant whisper that seemed to come from the vents in the ceiling. Chloe. It was not a voice she recognized. It was ancient and thin, like the rustling of dead leaves. She fled, leaving her cleats and shin guards behind. They gathered by their lockers, a huddled, terrified group. The plan to forget was failing. It wasn't a memory they could suppress. It was an active, malevolent force that had been disturbed. Their little trip into the basement hadn't just scared them. It had somehow tethered them to whatever was in that wing. They had knocked on its door, and now it was knocking back. "It's following us," Maya said, her voice a strained whisper. "It's not staying in the wing anymore." "The scratching?" Liam said, the terrifying realization dawning on him. "It wasn't trying to get out. It was trying to get our attention." "What do we do?" Noah asked, his usual bravado completely gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. "Who do we tell?" No one would believe us. They all knew the answer. There was only one person who might. One person who had looked at the blueprint with that same horrified recognition. One person who had tried to warn them away. "We have to talk to Davison," Chloe said, her voice firm despite the tremor running through her. "We have to tell him what we did, what we heard." She looked at the others, her eyes pleading. "He's the only one who knows what's really going on." The second confrontation with Mr. Davison was starkly different from the first. There was no pretense of a history project, no academic curiosity. There was only raw, undiluted fear. They found him after his shift, as he was locking up his supply closet in the main school's basement. The moment he saw the four of them approaching, a grim, knowing look settled on his face. He didn't look surprised. He looked weary, as if he had been expecting them. "You went in, didn't you?" he said, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. They stood before him, a quartet of chastened, terrified teenagers. Chloe, holding the rolled-up blueprint like a peace offering, simply nodded. The silence that followed was heavy with their unspoken confession. Davison sighed, a long, rattling exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of decades. He looked older than he had just a few days ago. The lines around his eyes were deeper. His shoulders slumped with a familiar resignation. "I knew it," he muttered, more to himself than to them. "I knew kids like you wouldn't be able to leave it alone." He unlocked his office door. "In. All of you." This time, he didn't bother with pleasantries. He cleared a stack of invoices off a dusty folding chair and pointed at it before sinking into his own groaning office chair. Liam, Chloe, Noah, and Maya squeezed into the cramped space, standing shoulder to shoulder. The little black and white television was off. The room felt like a tomb. "Tell me everything," Davison commanded, his pale blue eyes pinning each of them in turn. "From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." Chloe, her voice trembling at first but gaining strength as she spoke, recounted their entire story. She told him about finding the blueprint and the newspaper article, about their plan to borrow his keys, about their descent into the East Wing basement. She described the frantic messages scratched into the wall, the sealed-off section of concrete, and finally, the sound. As she described the rhythmic scratching, a visible shudder went through Davison. He closed his eyes, his face tight with a pained memory. Then, one by one, Liam, Noah, and Maya described the events of the past 2 days. The cold spots, the jangling keys, the power outage, and the word written on the wall, the disembodied whisper. They laid their terror bare before the old janitor. When they had finished, a profound silence filled the small office. Davison didn't speak for a long time. He just sat there, his hands clasped on his desk, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the concrete walls. "You fools," he finally whispered, the words laced not with anger, but with a deep, sorrowful pity. "You stupid, arrogant children. You knocked on the devil's door, and you're surprised he answered." He leaned forward, his elbows on his desk, and his voice dropped to a low, conspiratorial hush. "That wing isn't haunted by a ghost. Arthur Blackwood isn't rattling his keys down the halls. What's in there? It's older than this school, older than this town. The men who built that wing in the 20s, they knew. They knew the ground was bad." He gestured to the blueprint still clutched in Chloe's hand. "That room you found wasn't on the original plans. It was a last-minute addition. During the excavation for the foundation, they broke into something. A space that shouldn't have been there. A natural chamber deep in the earth. The workers started getting sick, seeing things, hearing things. 3 of them walked off the job and were never seen again. They said the place was wrong, unholy. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The architect, a man named Alistair Finch, was a member of some local esoteric society. He and the school's benefactor believed they hadn't found a simple cave. They believed they'd found a conduit, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. They redesigned the basement. They built that room not to keep people out, but to contain what was already inside. To study it, to listen to it. Liam felt a chill crawl up his spine. The school hadn't been built on top of something evil by accident. It had been built to surround it, to harness it. What is it? Maya asked, her voice barely audible. Davison shook his head slowly. It doesn't have a name. It's a presence. A voice. It whispers. Promises things. Knowledge. Power. It gets inside your head. It feeds on attention. On fear. For 50 years it was mostly quiet. Dormant. The school board at the time knew the stories, but they dismissed them. They kept the wing open. He finally looked at them, his eyes filled with a fresh, raw pain. Then came Arthur. Arthur was susceptible. A good man, but a sad man. His wife had passed. He was lonely. He spent most of his time alone in that wing at night. And it started talking to him. I was just a kid then, a junior custodian. I'd see him, standing in the hallways, looking at the walls, whispering to himself. He said he was hearing things. A voice. It was telling him secrets. He started getting obsessed. He found the old records, Finch's journals, the original blueprints. He figured out where the room was. Davison's own voice grew thick with emotion. He was convinced there was something wonderful in there, something that could answer all the questions of the universe. The voice told him so. The last night, he told me he was going to find a way in. He said it was calling to him. I tried to stop him. I begged him not to go, but he just smiled. The strange, serene smile, and walked into that wing. He never came out. The janitor's story hung in the air, a terrible, suffocating weight. Arthur Blackwood wasn't a victim of a random haunting. He had been lured to his doom. After he disappeared, they finally listened. Davison continued, his voice regaining its hard edge. They sealed the wing, officially for safety reasons, unofficially to let the thing in the basement starve. It needs an audience. It needs to be heard. For 40 years it has been silent because we have been silent. But you went down there. You put your ears to its wall. You gave it an audience. You woke it up. And now, he said, his gaze sweeping over their terrified faces, it knows your names. The janitor's final words landed like stones in the silent office. It knows your names. The statement was so simple, yet it carried a terrifying implication. They were no longer just witnesses to a phenomenon. They were targets. The vague, unsettling occurrences of the past few days suddenly felt like a preamble, a gentle probing before a more direct and sinister engagement. What do we do? Liam asked, his voice strained. He felt a desperate need for a solution, a ritual, anything to sever the connection they had so foolishly forged. Is there a way to make it stop? Davison leaned back in his chair, the springs groaning in protest. He looked utterly drained, as if the act of telling the story had taken a physical toll. Stop it? He scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. You can't stop the tide from coming in. It's a force of nature, a dark, patient one. The only thing that ever worked was ignoring it, starving it of the one thing it craves. He looked at them pointedly. Your attention, your fear, that's its food. But it's not letting us ignore it, Noah argued, his voice cracking. It's writing on walls. It's whispering in the vents. How are we supposed to ignore that? You have to try, Davison insisted, his voice rising with a desperate urgency. You have to pretend it isn't there. When you feel the cold, you walk through it. When you hear a sound, you tell yourself it's the pipes. You lie to it and you lie to yourselves until maybe, just maybe, it gets bored and goes back to sleep. It's a war of attrition. It's patience against your sanity. The plan, if it could even be called that, was deeply unsatisfying. It offered no action, no defense, only a passive, terrified hope that they could endure the psychological torment until it subsided. They left Davison's office in a state of quiet despair, the janitor's dire warnings echoing in their minds. He made them leave the blueprint with him. As he took it from Chloe's hand, he looked at the paper with a mixture of hatred and reverence. "Some things should just burn," he'd muttered before locking it away in a metal filing cabinet. The next few days were a living hell. Armed with the knowledge of what they were facing, every strange occurrence was magnified, every odd sound imbued with a horrifying new significance. They were hypervigilant, constantly on edge, and the entity seemed to revel in their anxiety. For Liam, it was the cold. It would find him anywhere, in the middle of a crowded, sunlit classroom, walking across the soccer field during practice, sitting at his family's dinner table. A sudden, bone-deep chill would envelop him, a perfect sphere of unnatural cold that felt like a hand pressing on him from all directions. It was a constant, physical reminder of the presence that was now attached to him. He started wearing a heavy hoodie everywhere, even indoors, but the cold wasn't external. It came from within, a psychological winter. Maya was tormented by sounds, not just the jangling keys, but new noises. The faint, almost inaudible sound of weeping would drift from empty classrooms she passed. Sometimes, she would hear the soft, rhythmic click of a pen, as if someone were sitting just behind her, taking notes. She took to wearing noise-canceling headphones, blasting music so loud it made her head ache, but she swore she could still hear the phantom sounds underneath the thumping bass, a ghost in the machine. Noah's torment was visual. He would catch fleeting glimpses of movement at the edge of his vision. A tall, thin shadow darting around a corner, a pale face peering out of a window for just a fraction of a second before vanishing. He became obsessed with reflections. He claimed he saw a figure standing behind him in shop windows, in the dark screen of his phone, in the rearview mirror of his car. The figure was always indistinct, a tall, gaunt silhouette with no discernible features, but its presence was utterly malevolent. He stopped looking in mirrors altogether. Chloe's experience was the most insidious. The entity continued to whisper to her. It was no longer just her name. It was whispering secrets, little things at first. It told her the answer to a question a teacher was about to ask. It told her which route to take home to avoid a traffic jam. Small, helpful, tempting bits of information. But then the whispers grew darker. It started telling her things about other students, their insecurities, their private shames, their hidden fears. It offered her power, a way to be popular, to be feared, to be respected. The voice was a constant, seductive murmur at the back of her mind, and Liam could see the toll it was taking. She was becoming more withdrawn, more paranoid, her eyes constantly darting around as if she were listening to a conversation no one else could hear. Their attempts to ignore it were failing spectacularly. How could they pretend it wasn't happening when the evidence was so constant, so personal, so perfectly tailored to each of their fears? Their grades slipped. They pushed their friends away. The four of them became an isolated island of terror in the sea of their normal high school lives. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. Liam was at home, trying and failing to study, when his phone began to buzz incessantly. It was a group chat Maya had created, titled Emergency. Maya, asterisk, it's in my house. I swear to God it's in my house. Asterisk, Noah. Asterisk, what do you mean? What's happening? Asterisk, Maya. Asterisk, the scratching. I hear it. It's not at school. It's coming from inside my closet door. Asterisk. Liam's heart stopped. The sound. It had left the school. It had followed one of them home. Chloe. Asterisk, Maya. Get out of the house. Go to a neighbor's. Now. Asterisk. Maya. Asterisk, I can't. I'm frozen. I'm in my bed. I can't move. Asterisk. Noah. Asterisk, we're coming over. Liam, Chloe, let's go. Asterisk. Liam was already grabbing his keys, his jacket. The entity had escalated its game. It was no longer content with subtle haunts and fleeting whispers. It was crossing a threshold, invading their sanctuaries. Davison's strategy of passive endurance was not enough. The thing in the walls wasn't getting bored. It was getting bolder. It was closing in. As he ran out to his car, a terrifying thought struck him. It had been contained within the school for 40 years. Now, because of them, it was learning it could travel. The drive to Maya's house was a frantic, silent race against a terror they couldn't define. The streets of their quiet suburban town, usually a source of comfort and normalcy, seemed menacing under the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. Every shadow between the houses looked like a waiting figure. Every rustle of leaves in the wind sounded like a whisper. Liam pulled up to Maya's two-story colonial just as Noah's car screeched to a halt behind him. Chloe was in the passenger seat, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone, her thumb hovering over the call button. "She's not answering her phone," Chloe said, her voice tight with panic. "She's read the texts, but she's not picking up." They scrambled out of their cars and ran up the driveway. The house was dark, except for a single light on in an upstairs window, Maya's bedroom. The idyllic scene of a quiet house on a quiet street was completely at odds with the frantic, terrified messages she had sent just minutes before. Noah, without hesitation, started banging on the front door. "Maya, it's us. Open the door." There was no response. The silence from within the house was heavy and unnatural. "The back," Liam said, his mind racing. "She always leaves the back slider unlocked." They ran around the side of the house, their feet sinking into the damp lawn. The backyard was cloaked in darkness. Liam fumbled for his phone, switching on the flashlight. He found the sliding glass door that led to the kitchen. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. The three of them exchanged a look of pure dread. They were about to willingly walk into a house that they believed contained a hostile, supernatural entity. But the thought of Maya, alone and terrified inside, overrode their fear. Liam slid the door open, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. "Maya," he called out, his voice a strained whisper. The house was eerily quiet. The air inside was still and cold, the same unnatural chill they had felt in the school. But now it was tinged with the familiar scent of Maya's home. Laundry detergent and cinnamon from a decorative broom hanging on the wall. The juxtaposition was sickening. They moved through the darkened first floor, their phone flashlights cutting nervous, trembling paths through the familiar spaces. The living room furniture was draped in shadows, the family photos on the mantelpiece looking like portraits of ghosts. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the entire house felt wrong, contaminated. The silence was the worst part. It felt like the house was holding its breath. "We have to go up," Chloe said, her gaze fixed on the top of the darkened staircase. They ascended the stairs slowly, each creak of the wooden steps sounding like a gunshot. Liam's heart was a frantic, wild thing in his chest. He half expected the thing from his nightmares, the tall, gaunt silhouette, to be standing at the top of the stairs, waiting for them. Maya's bedroom door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the dark hallway. As they drew closer, they heard it. Not the scratching they were expecting, but a soft, rhythmic sound. Thump, thump, thump. It was a low, muffled, steady beat. Liam pushed the door open. Maya was sitting on her bed, her back to them, facing the closet. She was wearing her pajamas, her long hair obscuring her face. Her body was rigid. The thumping sound was coming from her. She was methodically, gently, knocking her forehead against the polished wood of her closet door. "Maya," Chloe whispered, her voice filled with a horrified tenderness. Maya didn't turn. She didn't stop. She just continued the soft, rhythmic bumping of her head against the door, as if in a trance. Noah stepped forward, his voice shaky. "Maya, what are you doing? Let's get you out of here." He reached out to touch her shoulder. The moment his fingers made contact, she went limp, slumping forward against the closet door with a soft sigh. The thumping stopped. For a second, Liam thought she had fainted. But then she slowly turned her head, her hair falling away from her face. It was Maya, but it wasn't. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, and glassy, staring at a point somewhere beyond them. A thin, beatific smile was stretched across her lips, a look of serene, unblinking ecstasy. And then she spoke. But the voice that came from her mouth was not her own. It was a chorus, a layered, whispering rustle of countless voices speaking in unison, ancient and dry as dust. "She is listening," the chorus of voices said through Maya's smiling lips. "She has found such wonderful secrets in the dark, such beautiful patterns in the silence. She doesn't want to be disturbed." Liam, Chloe, and Noah stumbled backward, a collective gasp of pure terror escaping them. This was a violation far beyond a simple haunting. The entity wasn't just in the house. It was in their friend. It was wearing her like a suit. The head on Maya's shoulders turned with an unnatural smoothness, her serene smile never faltering, her eyes still fixed on that distant, unseen point. The whispering chorus continued, a sound that seemed to scrape at the inside of Liam's skull. "You came for her. You came to take her away from the conversation. But the conversation has just begun. There is so much more to hear. You could listen, too. All you have to do is be quiet and open the door." As the last word was spoken, a loud, sharp scratching sound erupted from the other side of the closet door, a frantic, desperate clawing that was a stark, violent contrast to the serene horror of Maya's possessed state. It sounded like an animal trapped and furious. The entity wasn't just in the room with them. It was on both sides of the door. The world narrowed to the confines of Maya's bedroom, a stage for a surreal and terrifying play. Liam's mind struggled to process the impossible scene. Maya, his friend, a smiling, serene puppet. Her voice a dry, whispering chorus from the grave, and the frantic, violent scratching from inside the closet, a sound of raw, caged fury. The two phenomena were a contradiction, a horrifying paradox that made no sense. What do you want?" Chloe stammered, taking a half-step forward. It was a foolish question, but the only one her terrified mind could produce. The smile on Maya's face widened, an unnatural stretching of her features. The whispering chorus that emanated from her lips had a mocking, condescending tone. "Want? We do not want. We are. We listen. We learn. She is learning. She is becoming attuned." The head tilted, an impossibly smooth, doll-like movement. "You, Chloe, you have tasted the whispers. You know their sweetness, the power in knowing. Why would you deny her that?" Chloe flinched as if struck. The entity was using the secrets it had shared with her as a weapon, twisting her private torment into a public indictment. Noah, who had been frozen in place, finally moved. He backed away slowly, his camera held low, forgotten. "This is wrong," he muttered, shaking his head. "This is so wrong. We have to get her out." The scratching inside the closet intensified, turning into a furious, splintering sound, as if a large animal were throwing itself against the wood. The thin door bulged outward with each impact. Splinters of white paint flaked off and fell to the carpet. "The listener must not be disturbed," the chorus whispered through Maya's smile, her serene expression unchanged by the violence happening inches from her head. "And the impatient must not be released. Such is the balance. She is the key. Her attention holds the lock." Liam stared, a horrifying, fragmented understanding beginning to dawn. The entity speaking through Maya, the voice, was the jailer. The frantic, scratching thing in the closet was the prisoner. And Maya, in her trance, was somehow the barrier between them. They had stumbled into a conflict far older and stranger than they could have imagined. "Maya, listen to me," Liam said, his voice surprisingly steady. He took a cautious step closer, ignoring the violent banging from the closet. He focused on his friend's empty eyes. "Whatever it's telling you, it's a lie. You have to fight it. You have to wake up." For the briefest of moments, a flicker of something crossed Maya's face. A twitch, a furrow of her brow, a tiny crack in the serene facade. The whispering chorus faltered, dissolving into a hiss of static. The scratching from the closet stopped instantly. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise. Then, the smile on Maya's face vanished, replaced by a snarl of pure venom. Her head snapped toward Liam, her eyes no longer vacant but blazing with an ancient, cold fury. "You!" A single, powerful voice now boomed from her, no longer a chorus but a sound of singular command and rage. "You will not take the vessel. The gate must be kept." With a speed that was utterly inhuman, she lunged. Not at Liam, but at Noah, who was closest to the bedroom door. Her hands, delicate and fine-boned, shot out and grabbed the front of his shirt. He cried out in shock as she slammed him back against the wall. The impact was shockingly forceful, the sound of his head hitting the drywall a sick, hollow thud. The spell of terrified paralysis broke. Chloe screamed. Liam reacted on pure instinct, surging forward and grabbing Maya's arms, trying to pull her off Noah. Her skin was icy cold, and her strength was astonishing. It was like trying to wrestle with a statue. "Let him go!" Liam yelled, pulling with all his might. Maya, or the thing controlling her, threw her head back and laughed. It was a horrible, grating sound, utterly alien coming from her throat. With a sudden, violent twist, she shoved Liam away. He stumbled backward, crashing into a dresser. The pictures and trinkets on top clattered to the floor. As he fell, his eyes were locked on the closet. The doorknob, a simple brass fixture, began to turn, slowly, deliberately, from the inside. A new wave of terror washed over him, colder and more profound than anything before. While the voice was distracted, fighting them, the prisoner was working on its escape. Chloe, seeing her chance, grabbed a heavy textbook from Maya's desk and swung it with all her might, hitting the possessed girl squarely in the side. The entity in Maya barely seemed to register the blow, but it was enough to make her loosen her grip on Noah. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. "The door!" Noah croaked, pointing a trembling finger. Click. The lock on the closet disengaged. The door swung open a few inches with a low, mournful creak, revealing a sliver of absolute, impenetrable blackness within. The entity possessing Maya whipped its head around, its borrowed face a mask of fury and panic. "No!" it shrieked, its voice tearing from her throat. It abandoned them, lunging back toward the closet, its hands outstretched as if to push the door shut. But it was too late. From the sliver of darkness, a pale, emaciated arm, far too long to be human, shot out and grabbed Maya's wrist. It was bone-white, the skin stretched thin over sharp, bird-like bones, and it ended in long, jagged fingers that looked like broken shards of black glass. Maya, the real Maya, screamed. It was her own voice this time, a sound of pure, undiluted agony that cut through the chaos. Her body convulsed, the serene smile and the furious snarl both gone, replaced by a mask of excruciating pain as the two entities fought for control of her, with her body as the battlefield. The thing in the closet was pulling her in. The entity that had been her jailer was trying to hold her back. Liam, Chloe, and Noah could only watch in frozen horror as their friend was torn between two impossible, warring forces at the threshold of a dark, silent void. The bedroom had become a nexus of paranormal warfare. The sight of Maya, caught between the possessive grip of the voice and the skeletal, inhuman arm from the closet, galvanized Liam into action. This was no longer about ghosts or whispers. This was a violent, physical struggle for his friend's life. "Help her!" he yelled, scrambling to his feet. He and Chloe lunged forward together. Liam grabbed Maya around the waist, planting his feet and pulling back with every ounce of strength he had. Chloe grabbed her other arm, trying to pry the long, pale fingers from her wrist. The skin of the arm was cold and unnaturally smooth, like polished marble. It was unyielding. Noah, recovering from the assault, saw the bedroom door was still open. He stumbled out into the hallway. "Her parents!" he yelled. "We need to get her parents!" His footsteps thundered down the stairs. Inside the room, the tug-of-war was terrifying. Maya's body was a rag doll between the opposing forces. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and a low, pained moan escaped her lips. The entity that had possessed her, the voice, seemed to be losing its grip, its power focused on the physical struggle rather than maintaining control of her mind. "It's too strong," Chloe grunted, her fingers slipping on the cold, smooth arm. The closet door was being forced open wider, inch by painful inch. More of the thing within was becoming visible. A glimpse of a sharp, bony shoulder, a tangle of what looked like matted, black hair, and a second arm, equally long and pale, emerged from the darkness to brace itself against the doorframe. The creature was pulling itself out of its prison. Liam felt Maya slipping from his grasp. His feet slid on the carpet. "I can't hold her." From downstairs, they heard Noah's frantic shouting, followed by the bewildered, then horrified, voices of Mr. and Mrs. Davis, Maya's parents. Footsteps pounded back up the stairs. Just as Maya's father, a large man in a bathrobe, appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief and terror, the creature in the closet gave a final, tremendous heave. It ripped Maya free from Liam and Chloe's grasp. She was pulled violently forward, half falling, half dragged into the closet. The door, freed from the pressure of the struggle, slammed shut with a deafening boom that shook the entire room. Silence. The bedroom was suddenly, shockingly still. The closet door stood closed, looking for all the world like a normal piece of furniture. Maya was gone. For a heartbeat, everyone was frozen. The sudden absence of the struggle, the noise, the presence, was a vacuum that sucked the air from their lungs. Then chaos erupted. Mrs. Davis screamed, a raw, piercing sound of maternal anguish. Mr. Davis, snapping out of his shock, charged the closet door, throwing his shoulder against it. "Maya!" he roared, his voice cracking with panic. Liam, Chloe, and Noah were stunned, breathless. They had failed. They had watched their friend be physically dragged into a dark, non-existent space by a skeletal monster. The reality of it was too vast, too horrifying to comprehend. Mr. Davis wrenched at the doorknob, turned easily. He pulled the door open. The closet was empty. It was a perfectly normal closet. Winter coats and sweatshirts hung neatly on a rail. Shoes were arranged in a tidy row on the floor. A stack of board games sat on the top shelf. There was no monster, there was no void, and there was no Maya. It was impossible. They had all seen it. The arm, the struggle, the door slamming shut. But the evidence of their eyes was being refuted by reality itself. Mrs. Davis collapsed into a sobbing heap on the floor. Mr. Davis, his face ashen, turned from the empty closet to face Liam, Chloe, and Noah. His eyes, wild with grief and confusion, fixed on them. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a gathering rage. "What did you do to my daughter?" Before any of them could even attempt to form an answer, a new sound began. It didn't come from the closet. It came from the school, faintly, in the distance, but clear in the sudden night silence. The old, disused bell in the East Wing's clock tower began to toll. It was a slow, deep, resonant dong, a sound none of them had ever heard before. A funeral bell. It was tolling for the fall of the gatekeeper, for the release of the prisoner. The sound seemed to vibrate in Liam's bones. He looked at Chloe and Noah. Their faces mirrored his own dawning, sickening horror. They had not just woken a dormant entity. They had upset a delicate, ancient balance. Their meddling, their fear, their very presence had given the prisoner the leverage it needed to break free. The voice, the entity that had possessed Maya, had been a jailer, a warden. A terrible, malevolent warden, but a warden nonetheless. And they had just helped its prisoner escape. And now that escape thing had their friend. The bell continued its slow, methodical tolling, a sound that carried across the sleeping town, announcing that the containment had been breached. The scratching was over. Something far worse was just beginning. The tolling of the bell was a punctuation mark on the night's horror, a sound that shifted the crisis from a localized, personal terror into something far broader. The police arrived, summoned by Maya's hysterical mother. The scene in the bedroom was chaotic and incomprehensible. To Mr. and Mrs. Davis, and now to the two uniformed officers who stood in the doorway, it was a simple, tragic case. Their daughter was missing, and her 3 friends were the last to see her. Their story, the real story, was impossible to tell. Liam tried. He stammered through an explanation of the school, the East Wing, the voice. The officers exchanged a look of pity and suspicion. They saw 3 teenagers in shock, possibly on drugs, spinning a ridiculous, fantastical tale to cover up whatever had actually happened to their friend. They were separated, questioned, their phones confiscated. Liam sat at the kitchen table, a uniformed officer across from him, asking the same questions over and over. Where did Maya go? Did she run away? Was there an argument? Was there a boy? Every logical question was a brick wall against the illogical, unbelievable truth. He could see the disbelief hardening into suspicion on the officer's face. They were no longer just witnesses. They were persons of interest. The bell had stopped tolling by the time dawn broke, but its phantom echo remained. The investigation moved to the school. The police, acting on the only lead they had, however insane it sounded, did a cursory search of the East Wing. They brought Mr. Davison in from his home before his shift even started. He met Liam's eye as he unlocked the main doors for the officers. His face was a grim, stone-like mask of resignation. He knew. He had known this was always a possibility. The police found nothing. The East Wing was exactly as it should be. A condemned, dusty, empty section of the school. The basement was just a basement. The wall in the northwest corner was solid concrete. There was no evidence of a struggle, no sign of Maya. Their story was officially dismissed as a collective delusion, a hysterical fantasy. The school became a hotbed of rumor and speculation. Maya Davis was a missing person. Her face was on the news. Students whispered in the hallways, trading theories. Had she been kidnapped? Had she run away? The truth, that she had been pulled into her own closet by a skeletal monster, was a secret that Liam, Chloe, and Noah were forced to carry alone. A suffocating weight of guilt and terror. The entity that had possessed Maya, the voice, was gone. The whispers Chloe heard had ceased. The fleeting shadows Noah saw were no more. The unnatural cold that had followed Liam had vanished. The absence of these phenomena was not a relief. It was a terrifying sign that the warden was gone, its duty over. In its place was something new. The prisoner was free. The first manifestation occurred 2 days after Maya's disappearance. The snarling Timberwolf mural, the one on the wall separating the gym from the East Wing, was vandalized. Someone had scratched it, defaced it, but the marks weren't from spray paint or markers. They were deep, savage gouges in the cinder block itself, as if a giant, clawed hand had raked itself down the wall, shredding the paint and scoring the stone beneath. The school administration blamed local gangs, but Liam knew. It was a signature, a territorial marking. Then came the hunger. It started in the cafeteria. A student fainted from what the nurse later called a sudden, inexplicable hypoglycemic shock. The next day, 2 more students complained of a dizzying, gnawing hunger that no amount of food could satiate. They felt weak, drained. Liam saw them, their faces pale, their eyes listless. He recognized the look. It was the same vacant, worn-out expression he'd seen on the faces of the men in the old construction photograph. The same sadness he'd seen in Arthur Blackwood's eyes. The creature that had been trapped for so long was now free, and it was feeding. Not on fear like the voice had, but on life force, on vitality. It was a parasite, and the entire school was its new host. Chloe, Noah, and Liam met in the one place they felt they could speak freely. The dusty, forgotten archive room in the school's basement. The weight of their shared knowledge had bound them together in a way no friendship ever could. "It's here," Noah said, his voice low. He looked exhausted, haunted. "It's not hiding. It's walking the halls with everyone else, and it's draining them dry. And we let it out." "Davison," Chloe said, her voice resolute. "He's the only one who might know what to do. The blueprint he took from us, the journals he mentioned, Alistair Finch's journals. The man who built the prison. Maybe he wrote down a way to put the prisoner back." Finding Davison was easy. He was in his office, as always. But when they confronted him, he refused. "No, he said, his voice hard, his eyes avoiding theirs. I tried to warn you. You didn't listen. This is your burden now, not mine. I'm an old man. I've lived with this town's secret my whole life. I won't be the one to stir the pot again. But Maya is gone, Liam pleaded. Other kids are getting sick. You can't just stand by and do nothing. Watch me, Davison said, his voice cold as ice. I'm a janitor. I clean up messes. This is one mess that's too big for me. I locked that file cabinet for a reason. Leave it be. Leave me be. He turned his back on them, dismissing them, ending the conversation. They were alone. The adults wouldn't believe them. The only one who did was refusing to help. That night, Liam had a dream. It was more vivid and coherent than any he'd had before. He was standing in the East Wing entrance hall, the air thick with dust. But he wasn't alone. Maya was there. She was standing in the center of the hall, her back to him. She was pale, translucent like a fading photograph. Maya, he called out in the dream. She turned slowly. Her eyes were hollow, her face etched with a profound sadness. You have to be the key, she whispered, her voice a faint echo. The lock is broken. You have to be the new key. What does that mean? He asked. How do we save you? You can't save me, she said, a tear tracing a path down her ghostly cheek. It's too late for me. I'm part of the lock now, part of the wall. But you can stop it from feeding. You have to show it a better meal. Before he could ask what she meant, a figure emerged from the shadows behind her. It was the creature from the closet. Tall, emaciated, its movements disjointed and unnatural. Its face was a smooth, featureless expanse of pale skin, with no eyes, no nose, only a thin, lipless slit that opened to reveal a maw of needle-like teeth. It placed one of its long, bony hands on Maya's shoulder. Liam woke up with a jolt, Maya's last words ringing in his ears. You have to show it a better meal. He knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, what she meant. The creature fed on life force, on the vitality of the students. It was a slow, parasitic feeding. But what if it were offered a different kind of energy? A more potent, more concentrated source. The fear, the attention, the raw psychological energy that the voice had fed on. They had to get the voice back. They had to pit the two entities against each other again. To do that, they needed to open a line of communication. They needed to go back to the source. They needed Alistair Finch's journals. And they knew exactly where they were. In Davison's locked filing cabinet. The janitor wouldn't help them, so they would have to help themselves. The plan was insane. A desperate, long-shot gamble. But it was the only one they had. They had to break into Davison's office. The decision to break into Davison's office felt like crossing a final, definitive line. Their first transgression, stealing the keys, had been born of a naive, thrill-seeking curiosity. This one was born of pure desperation, an act committed under the duress of a guilty conscience and a terrifying responsibility. They weren't kids looking for a ghost story anymore. They were soldiers in a war no one else knew was being fought. The plan was simple and reckless. They would wait until late, after Davison had finished his shift and left the school. Noah, who had once dabbled in lockpicking after watching too many spy movies, was confident he could handle the simple lock on the janitor's office door. Their biggest obstacle was the school's newfound vigilance. After Maya's disappearance, a private security guard now patrolled the grounds at night. They met near the back entrance by the dumpsters, a corner of the school grounds poorly lit and out of the patrol route's direct line of sight. The air was cold, and the silence of the night was punctuated by the distant drone of the highway. You really think you can do this? Liam asked Noah, looking at the small leather pouch of picks and tension wrenches in his hand. Theoretically, Noah said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. It's a standard pin tumbler lock, old, probably cheap. The real problem is getting past the alarm system. Davison arms it when he leaves. He has to disarm it when he comes in, though, Chloe said, thinking aloud. She was the strategist even now. Her fear was channeled into a sharp, focused intensity. The panel is right inside the west entrance, by the main office. We'd need the code. A wave of hopelessness washed over them. A code. Another insurmountable obstacle. "I know the code," Liam said quietly. Chloe and Noah both turned to stare at him. "What? How?" Noah asked. "My mom is on the PDA board," Liam explained, a fact he'd never had reason to mention before. "She volunteers for after-school events, fundraisers. They have a code for the main doors. I've seen her use it a dozen times. I'm pretty sure it's a master code." He recited the 6-digit number, the sequence suddenly feeling like the most important piece of information he had ever possessed. A flicker of hope returned. It was a slim chance, but it was a chance. They waited in the shadows for another hour, a tense, silent vigil, until they saw the security guard's flashlight beam sweep past the front of the school and disappear around the far side of the building. "Now," Chloe whispered. They moved quickly and quietly, ghosts in the dark. Liam's hands trembled as he punched the code into the keypad. The small red light above the numbers blinked twice, then turned green. A soft click echoed in the night as the magnetic lock on the main door disengaged. They were in. The school was even more menacing than it had been on their first illicit visit. The knowledge of what was now loose within its walls had poisoned the very atmosphere. Every shadow was a potential hiding place for the featureless creature. Every echo felt like a footstep behind them. They made their way to the basement, their phone flashlights the only thing keeping the oppressive darkness at bay. The long, humming corridor that led to Davison's office felt like a descent into the maw of some great beast. The lock on the office door was, as Noah had predicted, simple. He worked with a tense, focused energy, the faint clicks of the pins inside the lock sounding like explosions in the silence. After a nerve-wracking minute that felt like an hour, he gave a final twist with the tension wrench. A loud, satisfying clunk echoed in the corridor. The door was open. Davison's office was just as they remembered it. Cramped, clean, smelling of coffee and chemicals. The metal filing cabinet stood against the far wall, a squat, gray monolith. "It's going to be locked too," Chloe said. Noah examined the cabinet's lock. "This one's different. It's a wafer lock. Cheaper, easier." He went to work again. This time, it took him less than 30 seconds. The drawer slid open with a low groan of protest. Inside, there was only one file, a thick, worn manila folder labeled AF Private. Below it lay the rolled-up blueprint they had given him. Chloe lifted the file out with a reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. She opened it on Davison's desk. It was filled with brittle, yellowed pages of handwritten notes and diagrams, all penned in a precise, spidery script. It was Alastair Finch's journal. They huddled around the desk, their phone lights converging on the pages, and began to read. Finch's early entries were filled with an academic, almost giddy, excitement. He wrote of the genius loci, the spirit of the place, and the subterranean aperture they had discovered. He described the voice which he called the cantor, or the chanter. He believed it was a benevolent, ancient intelligence, a source of profound wisdom. "The cantor sings a song of pure knowing," he wrote. Asterisk, "it offers visions, truths. It speaks in the language of thought itself. We must build it a proper resonator, a chamber to amplify its song and protect its sanctity." Asterisk. But as they flipped through the pages, the tone of the journal began to change. Finch's elegant script grew more erratic, more frantic. He started to write about the other presence. He never gave it a name. He only ever referred to it as the Silent One or the Husk. "The aperture is a shared space." An entry read, the ink blotted as if the pen had been pressed too hard. Asterisk, "The cantor is not alone. There is another, parasite, a void that hungers. It followed the cantor through the tear in worlds. It is drawn to life, to warmth, to essence. It has no voice, no mind, only a bottomless, silent appetite. It is the shadow that the cantor's light casts." Asterisk. The journal then detailed the construction of the East Wing. The sealed room wasn't a resonator for the cantor. It was a prison for the Silent One. Finch realized his horrible mistake too late. The cantor wasn't a benevolent teacher. It was a cosmic warden, and its song was the very thing that kept the Silent One contained. The architecture of the East Wing, the long, straight corridors, the specific placement of iron support beams, the high, narrow windows, was all designed by Finch in a desperate attempt to create a massive architectural cage, using esoteric principles of containment to amplify the Cantor's power and keep the Silent One trapped in the sealed room. "The whole wing," Liam breathed, looking up from the journal. "The whole wing is the lock." "And Maya said she's part of the lock now," Chloe added, her face pale. "She's somehow reinforcing the prison that we broke." They found the final entry, dated years after the school was completed. Finch's handwriting was a barely legible scrawl. Asterisk, "The balance is too fragile. The Cantor's strength wanes when it is not heard. It requires an anchor, a listener, to focus its song. But to listen is to risk being consumed by it. I have failed. I have built a prison with a sentient lock and a hungry ghost for a warden. I have chained a whisper to a shadow. May God forgive me for what I have unleashed upon this place. The only solution I can conceive is a reversal, a lure. The Silent One is drawn to life, but perhaps it can be drawn back to its cell by a great enough offering. A beacon, a soul willingly given to the void. A sacrifice. Asterisk, a sacrifice." The word hung in the air of the small office, cold and heavy as a tombstone. That was Finch's final, desperate solution. To lure the creature back into its cell by offering it a willing meal. As the horrifying implication of the words settled over them, a new sound reached them from down the long, dark basement corridor. It was a soft, wet, dragging sound, and it was getting closer. They all froze, their blood turning to ice. They switched off their phone lights, plunging the office into absolute darkness. Huddled together, they listened as the sound grew louder. A slow, rhythmic shhhhh thump, shhhhh thump, like something heavy and damp being dragged across the concrete floor. It was coming for them. It knew they were there. It knew they had the book. And it was hungry. The darkness in Davison's office was total, a thick, suffocating blanket that erased the world. The only reality was the sound. The wet, dragging noise grew steadily louder, closer. Shhhhh thump, shhhhh thump. It was the sound of immense, deliberate weight being moved. Liam's mind, frantic and terrified, supplied an image. The creature, the Silent One, its long, emaciated limbs not strong enough to support its own mass, dragging its gaunt frame along the concrete floor, pulling itself forward with those bone-white, glass-tipped fingers. He held his breath, a painful, burning pressure in his chest. He could feel Chloe trembling beside him, could hear Noah's ragged, suppressed breathing. They were trapped. The filing cabinet was cold against Liam's back, the journal a dead weight in Chloe's hands. The knowledge they had just gained felt less like a weapon and more like a eulogy, a sacrifice. The word echoed in the silent, terrified corners of his mind. The dragging stopped directly outside the office door. The silence that followed was 1,000 times worse than the noise had been. It was a listening, predatory silence. They were mice in a box, and the cat was just on the other side of the thin metal door. Liam could feel its presence, a palpable pressure that pushed against the door, a cold that seeped through the cracks. He pictured the featureless face, the lipless maw, waiting patiently in the dark corridor. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Every beat of his own frantic heart sounded like a drum, a betrayal that announced their position. He wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there in the suffocating dark, waiting for the inevitable. Then, a new sound began, a soft, inquisitive scratching at the door. Not the frantic, desperate scratching they had heard from behind the basement wall. This was a delicate, searching sound. The glass-tipped fingers were tracing the outline of the door, testing its surface, hunting for a way in. Noah let out a small, strangled whimper. The sound was tiny, but in the absolute quiet, it was a thunderclap. The scratching stopped. There was a soft, wet pop, like a suction cup being released, followed by a faint, metallic groan. The doorknob. It was trying the doorknob. Liam's mind went into overdrive. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't fight that thing. Their only hope was to flee. But how? The corridor was blocked. Then he remembered the tiny, flickering black and white television on Davison's shelf. In his panic, his mind latched onto the mundane detail. Why was it there? It got no reception in the basement. It was plugged into a heavy-duty extension cord that snaked up the wall and disappeared through a small, drilled hole near the ceiling. A vent? Conduit? He reached out in the darkness, his hands shaking, and fumbled along the wall until his fingers brushed against the thick, rubbery cord. He followed it up. The hole was small, maybe 6 inches in diameter, and covered by a rusty metal grate. It led somewhere. Anywhere was better than here. The vent, he whispered, his voice a dry, cracking sound. Up here. The doorknob rattled more violently now, the sound of metal straining against metal. The creature was getting impatient. Chloe and Noah understood immediately. There was no other option. Noah, being the tallest, gave Chloe a boost. She scrambled up the side of the filing cabinet, her sneakers scraping against the metal. She reached the grate. "It's screwed in," she hissed, her voice tight with panic. The office door groaned, a deep, metallic sound of bending metal. The creature was putting its weight against it now. "Use the lockpicks," Liam urged Noah. Noah scrambled up beside Chloe, fumbling with his leather pouch. He worked one of the thin metal picks into the gap between the grate and the wall. He pried. The old, rusty screw groaned in protest. Bam! A tremendous impact shuddered through the door, knocking a framed photo of a fisherman off Davison's desk. It hit the floor with a crash of splintering glass. The creature was done being patient. Noah gave another desperate pry. The screw popped free. He moved to the next one. Bam! The door dented inward, the shape of a massive shoulder or hand appearing in the bent metal. "Hurry!" Liam yelled, his own voice sounding distant and strange to his ears. The second screw gave way. The grate swung loose on its remaining hinges. Chloe didn't hesitate. She shoved Finch's journal through the opening and then scrambled in after it, disappearing into the blackness of the vent shaft. Crunch! The sound of the lock on the door breaking was final. The door swung open with a screech of tortured metal. Noah shoved himself through the vent opening just as Liam started to climb. He looked back. For a fraction of a second, his eyes met the face of the thing in the doorway. It filled the entire frame, a towering, skeletal silhouette against the faint light of the corridor. The face was just as he had imagined. A smooth, pale, featureless mask of skin. The lipless slit of its mouth opened, a black, silent O of infinite hunger. Terror gave Liam a final surge of adrenaline. He launched himself into the vent, clawing his way into the narrow, dusty space. He felt a cold draft as the creature lunged, its glass-tipped fingers scraping against the metal filing cabinet just below his feet. He was in. They were safe for the moment. They were in a narrow, rectangular ventilation shaft, choked with dust and cobwebs. It was a tight fit, their bodies pressed together in the dark. Below them, they could hear the creature moving around in the office, its heavy, wet movements punctuated by the sound of furniture being overturned, the splintering of wood. It was searching for them. "Which way?" Noah whispered, his voice trembling. The shaft branched in 2 directions. One seemed to lead back toward the main school, the other deeper into the foundations toward the east wing. "The east wing," Chloe said, her voice surprisingly firm. She was clutching the journal to her chest. Finch's journal. He wrote that the entire wing is a prison. Maybe it's also the key to the trap. We have to go back to where it all started. It was a terrifying, insane logic, but it was the only logic they had. They began to crawl, wriggling through the suffocating darkness of the vent, away from the ransacked office and toward the heart of the school's darkness. Behind them, they heard a new sound. The screech of metal on metal as the silent one began to tear the grate off the wall, determined to follow. The hunt was on. The crawl was a form of torture. The ventilation shaft was a tight, coffin-like rectangle of sheet metal, so narrow that Liam had to keep his arms pinned to his sides, moving forward with an awkward, caterpillar-like shuffle. The air was thick with a century of dust, a fine, gritty powder that coated his tongue, clogged his nostrils, and made his eyes burn. Every movement sent cascades of filth raining down from the top of the shaft. Chloe was in the lead, a dark shape in the near-total blackness. Finch's journal clutched to her chest. Noah was behind her, his breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. Liam was at the rear, a position that offered him the dubious honor of being closest to the thing that was hunting them. A screech of tortured metal echoed from behind them, a sound that vibrated through the floor of the vent and up Liam's spine. It was the sound of the grate in Davison's office being torn from the wall. A moment later, they heard it enter the shaft. But it wasn't crawling. It was a fluid, rushing sound, a horrifying slithering, like a great serpent made of wet leather and broken bones. It was moving faster than they were, its unnatural locomotion perfectly suited to the narrow confines. The wet, dragging sound was gone, replaced by a swift, relentless pursuit. Faster, Liam hissed, his voice choked with dust and panic. It's in here. It's coming. They pushed onward, their movements clumsy and desperate. Their knees and elbows scraped against unseen rivets and sharp metal seams, the pain a distant, secondary concern. The primary focus was the growing cold at Liam's back, a creeping chill that was the creature's vanguard. They passed over a vertical shaft, and for a moment, the flashlight beam from Chloe's phone illuminated a grate below them. Liam risked a glance down. Through the grimy slats, he could see one of the abandoned classrooms of the East Wing. Dust-covered desks sat in neat, silent rows, their surfaces ghostly pale in the faint light. On the chalkboard at the front of the room, written in what looked like thick strokes of dust, were two words: "He is hungry." The message wasn't from the creature behind them. It was a remnant of the other one, the cantor, a lingering echo of the warden, a final, useless warning. The thought brought no comfort. Liam's mind raced, tumbling over the words in Finch's journal. A soul willingly given. A sacrifice. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a strategy. A terrible, medieval solution to a cosmic problem. He looked at the dark shapes of his friends ahead of him, crawling for their lives. He thought of Noah's easy humor, now replaced by stark terror. He thought of Chloe's fierce determination, now honed to a sharp, desperate edge. He couldn't let that be them. The thought settled in his gut with the cold, heavy certainty of dread. If a sacrifice was what it took, it would have to be him. The structure of the vent groaned ahead of them. Chloe stopped abruptly, causing Noah and Liam to bump up against each other in a clumsy pile-up. "What is it?" Noah whispered, his voice frantic. "The shaft. It's collapsed," Chloe reported back, her voice shaking. "The floor is gone. It's just an open drop into the hallway below." They were trapped. The path ahead was gone, and the slithering, chilling sound from behind was getting closer, the cold intensifying with every passing second. Liam could feel it now, a profound, unnatural cold seeping through the metal floor of the vent, a cold that felt like a physical manifestation of the grave. "There has to be another way," Liam said, his voice straining to stay calm. He swept his phone's light around their confined space. To their right, set into the wall of the main shaft, was another grate, a large, circular one, about 3 feet in diameter. It looked like an old service access port. "Here," he said, his light fixing on it. "We have to get this open." Getting to it was an exercise in painful contortion. Noah had to press himself flat against the floor while Chloe and Liam squeezed past him. The grate was held in place by a single, large rotating handle in the center, rusted solid from decades of disuse. Chloe and Liam grabbed the handle, their hands overlapping, and pulled. It wouldn't budge. The slithering sound stopped. The silence returned, more terrifying than ever. It was close. It was right around the last bend in the shaft, just a few feet away. The cold was now so intense that Liam could see his own breath fogging in the beam of his flashlight. "Together," he grunted. "Now!" They threw their entire weight into it, their muscles screaming in protest. The rusted metal groaned. A high, piercing shriek that seemed to echo through the entire ventilation system. With a final, shuddering jolt, the handle turned. The locking mechanisms disengaged with a series of loud, satisfying clunks. Liam pushed the heavy grate. It swung outward into empty space and then fell, crashing onto a marble floor somewhere below with a deafening, echoing clatter. They had an escape. "Go!" Liam yelled, pushing Chloe toward the opening. She slid through, clutching the journal, and dropped from sight. Noah was right after her. Liam scrambled to follow, but as he moved toward the hole, he glanced back down the dark shaft. Two pale, luminous discs appeared in the darkness. Not eyes, but featureless patches of skin that glowed with a faint, sickly internal light. They were set in the smooth, blank face of the Silent One as it rounded the corner. It was here. Liam didn't think. He threw himself through the opening, his body tumbling through empty air for a terrifying second before he hit the floor hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He landed in a heap on the cold, dusty marble of the East Wing's grand entrance hall. Chloe and Noah were already on their feet, staring up at the vent from which they had just escaped. From the dark opening, the creature's long, bone-white arm emerged, its glass-tipped fingers scraping against the metal rim as it felt for a grip. It was coming out. They were out of the vents, but they were not safe. They were in the heart of the creature's prison, a place where it was strongest, and they had nowhere left to run. The Silent One dropped from the vent, its landing unervingly quiet for a creature of its size. It unfolded itself to its full, towering height, a grotesque caricature of a human form drawn in lines of bone and shadow. Its featureless face, glowing with that pale, internal light, swiveled slowly, surveying the hall. Chloe and Noah were paralyzed, their faces masks of pure terror. But Liam, looking at the creature, felt a strange, cold clarity descend upon him. The chaotic fragments of the past few days, the journal, the dream, Maya's ghostly words, snapped into a single, horrifying picture. Asterisk, a soul willingly given. You have to be the new key. Asterisk, it wasn't a riddle. It was an instruction manual. The basement, he said, his voice low and steady, startling his friends from their stupor. We have to get it back to the sealed room. Liam, we can't fight that thing. Noah whispered, his eyes wide with horror. We're not going to fight it, Liam said, his gaze locked on the creature. We're going to feed it. He looked at Chloe, at the journal clutched in her hand. I'm the lure. I'll draw it down. You two, find a way to slam the door. Before they could protest, he took a deep breath and shouted into the cavernous hall. Hey! The creature's blank face snapped toward him. The lipless slit of its mouth widened slightly. You're hungry, right? Liam's voice shook, but he stood his ground. You want life? You want warmth? Come and get it. He turned and ran. He didn't run for the main doors for escape. He ran deeper into the East Wing, toward the basement stairs. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The creature was following, moving with a silent, gliding speed that was utterly terrifying. It wasn't running. It was simply flowing through the space, a river of darkness and hunger. Chloe and Noah, spurred by a combination of fear and a desperate, dawning understanding of Liam's intent, scrambled after them. They raced down the main hall, past the dusty classrooms and shrouded furniture, a frantic procession led by a willing sacrifice. They clattered down the basement stairs, plunging back into the cold, damp darkness. Liam's phone provided the only light, its beam bouncing madly as he ran down the long concrete corridor. He could feel the creature's proximity as a physical weight, a crushing cold that threatened to slow his limbs. He reached the northwest corner, the spot where their nightmare had begun. The wall, crudely patched, looked no different, but now Liam knew it was the door to a cage. He spun around, his back to the wall, and faced his pursuer. That's far enough, he yelled, his voice echoing in the confined space. The Silent One glided to a halt a dozen feet away, its glowing face illuminating the grim surroundings. It tilted its head, a gesture of almost animal curiosity. It had him cornered. The meal was ready, Chloe and Noah arrived, skidding to a stop behind the creature. Chloe had the journal open, her phone's light frantically scanning the last, desperate pages. Liam, it says, the cantor, the warden, is powered by belief, by focus. You have to call it. Liam knew. He closed his eyes for a second, picturing Maya's sad, translucent face. Be the new key. He opened them, his fear giving way to a profound, heart-wrenching resolve. He ignored the silent one. He looked past it, at the very air, at the walls, at the oppressive silence of the wing itself. I hear you, he said, his voice ringing with a strength he didn't know he possessed. I'm listening. I'm not afraid. I'll be your anchor. I'll be your audience. I'll listen for as long as it takes. Just be strong enough. Do your job. He poured all his will, all his focus, all his life into that single, desperate plea. He was offering himself, not to the creature before him, but to its jailer. For a moment, nothing happened. The silent one began to glide forward again, its long, bony arms raising, its glass-tipped fingers flexing. Then the air changed. A low hum started, a vibration that seemed to come from the very stones of the foundation. The oppressive cold of the silent one was met with a new energy, a crackling, static-filled warmth. The lights of their phones flickered wildly. The whispers started, not just in Chloe's mind, but in all of their minds. 1,000 voices, a choir of knowledge and power. The cantor's song returning, amplified and focused by Liam's willing sacrifice. The silent one stopped. It seemed confused. It was trapped between its intended meal and the rising power of its ancient warden. The patched section of the wall behind Liam began to shimmer, the solid concrete turning translucent, revealing the absolute, starless void of the cell within. The prison door was opening. The cantor's voice boomed in their minds, a singular, powerful command directed at its prisoner. Enough. The silent one recoiled, turning from Liam as if it had been struck. It looked at the shimmering wall, at the void calling it home. It seemed to understand that its brief season of freedom was over. With a final silent shriek that was felt rather than heard, a wave of pure despair and rage, it was pulled backward, its form dissolving as it was sucked through the shimmering portal. The moment its last appendage vanished into the void, the wall solidified. The shimmer faded. The humming stopped. The whispers ceased. The air returned to normal, cold, dusty, and silent. It was over. Chloe and Noah stared, breathless, at the solid wall. Then they looked at Liam. He was still standing, his back against the wall, but he was changed. The terror and adrenaline were gone from his face, replaced by a deep, unnerving calm. His eyes seemed older, filled with a knowledge and weariness that didn't belong to a high school student. He was the anchor. He was the key. He was the new warden. Liam, Chloe asked, her voice trembling. He gave them a small, sad smile. It's locked, he said, his voice quiet. The balance is restored. Maya, she's at peace. Her part is done. Let's go, Noah said, taking a step toward him. Let's get out of here. Liam shook his head slowly. You two can go. I have to stay. This is my post now. His eyes drifted down the long, dark corridor. Someone has to listen. Someone has to keep the lock strong. The terrible finality in his words was absolute. He was no longer just their friend. He was a part of the East Wing now, as much as the bricks and the dust. He had sacrificed his future to pay for their mistake. Tears streamed down Chloe's face as she finally understood. This was the cost. Noah stood in stunned, heartbroken silence. There were no words. They simply looked at their friend, their hero, for the last time. He nodded to them, a silent dismissal. Go, live. They turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the quiet darkness of the basement. As they ascended the stairs and stepped out into the main hall, they didn't look back. They emerged from the East Wing's doors into the main school, the heavy chains rattling as they closed the entrance. They walked out of the school and into the first, pale light of dawn, leaving the secrets of Blackwood High behind them. The East Wing stood silent, a dark, forgotten monument. But it was not empty. It had its prisoner, and now it had its guard. A lonely boy bound to a whispering voice, destined to stand watch for an eternity. The final, tragic secret in a school built on shadows. They say every story has an echo, that the sounds and words can attract the attention of something. Can you feel it now? That cold spot on the back of your neck? That's the echo of this story, looking for you. Give this video a like if you felt it, and subscribe if you want to find out what other echoes we can awaken together. Just remember, when you turn off the lights, listen carefully. Sometimes you can hear more than you were meant to. Sleep well.